A strong superintendent-school board relationship is the foundation of a successful school district. But how do leaders build and maintain that trust? Let's talk about it in this episode of Leading the Way. Hey everyone, it's OSBA Scott Gerfen. I want to thank our sponsor, Pappas and Associates. They're shaping policy with integrity. Well, a strong collaborative relationship between the school board and superintendent can drive student achievement, improve district operations, and foster a positive school culture. But what does it take to build and maintain that trust? And how can leaders overcome common challenges like communication barriers, role confusion, and board turnover? We have two experienced education leaders with us today to share their experiences. Dave Axner is a former superintendent and executive director of the Buckeye Association of School Administrators, and Cheryl Ryan, a former school board member, is OSBA's Director of Board and Management Services. Welcome in.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Hey, Scott.
Dave and Cheryl, you both have experience in these leadership roles. Can you briefly share your background and how your experiences inform your current work?
It's a great question. I was a school board member for several years in Hilliard City Schools and then came to OSBA directly from there. I find that I was fortunate in having a board that had a very functional, I think a high-functioning relationship with its superintendent. So I felt like I had sort of some good training ground when I came to OSBA. But in board services, which is the area of my expertise, we work all the time with helping boards be better. And the best way for them to be better is to have a super great relationship with their superintendent.
Okay.
So I started in Sandusky City Schools, getting into administration, and then moved to Chagrin Falls as, again, a principal, and moved up the last 7 years to the superintendency. And then came down here to Columbus at Dublin City Schools. And after that, retired and came to association life, started with the Principals Association for a year, and then moved over to BASA, Buckeye Association of School Administrators. Thought I would do a year or two, and 10 years later, here my poops.
So from your perspective, Dave, why is the superintendent-school board relationship so critical to a district's success?
Well, it is critical because, superintendent, that job description pretty much encompasses everything. And so they're the leader. They've got to make ridiculous, hard decisions and so forth. But along with that, if they're not in concert with the school board, it's going to hurt the students, the staff, and the entire school community. So I love to see when those two entities can work together, believe in each other. It makes such a difference.
The board's responsibility is to work with the superintendent to set the direction for the district, to create the vision and the mission and the goals, and then to stay in that sort of high-minded governance mode. The board members as individuals generally don't know what the superintendent, they don't know the details of a superintendent's job and all the hundreds of things they're managing on a daily basis. So that relationship, the board needing to stay in concert with the superintendent about what's happening on the ground is tantamount to them being effective in the community.
So when you build a strong partnership in anything, communication is key. Cheryl, what best practices help ensure clear, productive communication between superintendents and boards?
Yeah, I think that's $1 million question because almost every time that I have worked with a board that's having issues with one another or with their superintendent, it tends to be about communication.
Yeah.
And I think a superintendent who is willing to be very consistent with updates, to be very accountable and what's the word I'm looking for? Transparent.
Yes.
With each individual board member. Oftentimes that's through the board president, but board members need to be transparent with the superintendent as well. And it's communication is a two-way street, and it needs to be frequent, consistent, fair, and professional.
Dave, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say one of the issues, there's no question that once in a while, the job itself and the ego will come forward with the superintendent because they're trying to make decisions and move forward constantly. But those superintendents that we really work with in their beginning superintendent program to encourage them to take time with your board and not just the entire board, but individually talk with them, their needs, their concerns, because you can't drop down in a district as a superintendent where you have board members that have letter jackets on from 20, 30, 40 years ago. They have kids in the school, and now I'm going to tell them my goals, and this is the direction we're going to go in. It's got to be something that those goals and those, activities that they want to move forward with are collective in nature and not just one person. And it should be the same with the board in regards to that communication.
So as with any professional relationship, disagreements are inevitable. What are some of the effective strategies, Dave, for resolving conflicts in a way that maintains that trust and progress? Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest. I think lately we've been a little out of whack. And, there's been more situations because of some of, coming through COVID, and then that federal politics are seeping down, into the schools and into the jobs of superintendents of boards, and everybody's got their own feeling. And sometimes, many times, that takes away with what we're supposed to be centering on, and that's the students in our district and doing everything we can to make them successful. So, sometimes it means that someone will not let up their opinion versus working to get, what is best again for the district or the students. And that's when it can get really difficult.
Cheryl, anything you want to add to that?
I think that board members need to be willing to work with one another. I think a good board president is really important to a board president who's willing to engage all the other board members to being on the same page. Dave made a great point about getting to know your board members individually, especially in these sort of trying political times. One of the biggest issues boards have is when individual board members have a passion that gets in the way of the collective thinking of the board. And that has to remain top of mind. We, regardless of our political position, we can't just say we're in it for the kids. We have to really mean it, and we have to be willing to have conversations that bring us all to the same place of moving forward in terms of student achievement for our kids. And we can't help our superintendents be effective if we as board members can't get on the same page together.
So with you both being in your past roles as a board member and a superintendent, can you share some examples of those difficult superintendent board conversations maybe you've experienced or observed, and how were they successfully managed? I'll start with you, Dave.
Yeah, I would start with just, again, my 10 years in this position and seeing the difference of supporting and helping superintendents. When there was an issue that there was a cause and there was a reason in regards to why that superintendent was called on the carpet, disciplined, hit the possibility of them losing their job, and there was kind of a formula to that. But what has happened is, actually, Dr. Rachel White, University of Texas, is doing a lot of work on this in board and superintendent relations. So there's data that's pretty strong. That's clear that many times, the majority of times, and there's an increase of not having a cause in a superintendent, not because of his or her ability and doing their job, but is it being let go or contract non-renewed with no cause. It had anything to do with that other than maybe a decision that one school board member possibly started, and then that majority falls that way, and that superintendent's looking for a job. So we're seeing a lot more of that, and it's pretty clear also in her data that the contention and the political nature of what we're seeing now is seeping into what we're seeing with superintendents migrating to other places.
I think sometimes it can be easy stuff too. I've gotten calls from board members that say my superintendent talks to these two board members but doesn't talk to me. Again, it sort of goes back to that communication and making sure all information is shared by the superintendent with all board members, or making sure with the superintendent and the board president that it's being shared with all board members. Sometimes it's a squabble between board members. And I always tell a board member, never put your superintendent in the middle. The board's job to govern one another is the board's job. Sometimes it's about a superintendent evaluation. And the superintendent had goals that the full board agreed on in the summer and that have been monitored and tracked. And now we're at spring. And just as David said, the superintendent makes a decision that affects a relative in the district, maybe negatively. And now all of a sudden that board member has an axe to grind. So those are all the kinds of things that I think are not uncommon disagreements.
One other thing I want to talk about is board turnover is another factor that's impacting a superintendent's ability to maintain continuity. How can superintendents and district leaders get through these kinds of transitions effectively?
That's a great question. I'll take it first, and then because probably it's a great question, and it's a hard question. We find at OSBA that every 4 years when we have board member elections, or every 2 years, that we sometimes lose as many as a third of our board members, or a third of them turn over. That's a whole lot of new bosses for our superintendents. And I think a good orientation program, a good program that a superintendent and the central office put in place to orient a new board member, bring them on as quickly as possible, good board training. OSBA is certainly happy to provide that. I think those are some of the things that can help along the transition, and then maintaining that strategic plan. And then it doesn't matter when a new person joins the boat. If everybody else in the boat knows where they're going, it's much easier for the new person to row in the right direction.
Yeah, I would probably look back at Conrad Ott, superintendent for 27 years in Akron, which just doesn't happen. An average is about 3 years in the district, and he did 27. And I was fortunate enough to have him in some of my doctoral classes at the University of Akron. And I remember him telling us, you got to just quit counting at 3. It's really hard to please 5 board members. And when everything's clicking and you're checking things off and you're getting it done, it's fun. And that district's going to move with student data, with athletic, everybody comes together. But sometimes just one board member that has a right also to speak their word and their opinion, but is in no way the majority and just doesn't want to understand that, it gets a little tougher, and then all of a sudden it's 2. I can't tell you how many times I've told superintendents on the phone or in person when they're really struggling with their school board, or maybe one, and they're just ready to go to another district or this and that. And I said, give it a year. Just give it a year. Do your best to work with them, communicate to them. Just because they're giving you a hard time, they should get all the information everyone else is, and you'll be surprised. And most of the time, I'll hear a year later, yeah, you were right. It's good now, and we're okay. And maybe they're not best friends, but at least they're able to do the work and have good discussions.
Before we wrap up, what advice would you give a new superintendent or a newly elected school board member about fostering this partnership?
One of the things I've said in the last few years more regularly is if the superintendent has those regular meetings with individual board members or 2 board members at a time, what are your 3 greatest wins over the last few months? As a board member, what have you really enjoyed the last couple of months, and what's been problematic for you? And then the board asking that question to the superintendent, what are we doing to sort of get in your way? Or what am I as a board member doing to get in your way? If we can have those professional, respectful, 2-way and open conversations, the disagreements that you mentioned, the hurdles might not happen. But I think the superintendents who enjoy the work and recognize that the board has a significant function to play in the district are superintendents that generally are going to have boards that respect one another.
Dave?
Yeah, and again, it's different now. Just ask or talk to the search teams that are trying to work with school boards and identify the next leader. Wherein you go back 10, 15, 20 years, there would be 50 candidates at most jobs, and now search teams will be calling us. Is there anybody that you guys think might be good for this job? And so now the field has definitely shrunk because of the difficulty in what they have. And again, I do think it works both ways. It sometimes it can be, and we'll tell them, the superintendent, maybe it's the way you're behaving and so forth. But it goes back to what we started with. The primary thing of especially a new superintendent is to take the time to talk to the board collectively and individually, and don't push off for others to inform them and so forth. You should be doing that as a leader.
Final thoughts before we wrap it up. Cheryl.
Well, I think Dave's talked about it a few times. It's just that it's the lake's a little bit muddy right now, right? Yeah. And it seems like as long as I've been doing this, there's always some issue that has everybody up in arms. But the past couple of years have been difficult. And it's a challenge to be a functional board, and it's a challenge to be a really highly effective board leadership team, including the superintendent and treasurer. But there are districts all over Ohio that are doing it, and they're doing it every day. And so I hope that we can continue to serve, and I look forward to the good work that continues to get done.
Well, I know we've got a great relationship. I've presented multiple places in and out of the state of Ohio. So we're on the same page, and we know our associations. The good news is we get along. There's a lot of communication and in this building alone. The other piece is I would hope that those positive board members that, again, maybe it is the majority, but sometimes can just be quiet versus, letting that superintendent that board member that maybe is being negative for the wrong reasons. Maybe they have to get loud sometime, and not let that happen to the school board or the district or whatever, because it just harms everybody. And it doesn't help move the superintendent out. Again, there's clear data that just because a school board superintendent relation is rocky, that doesn't move the superintendent out, and there's data. But on the other hand, if that relationship's good, then it's that superintendent is going to be more likely to stay in the same district.
Well, Dave and Cheryl, thank you again for coming on. This is some good stuff. And I know, Cheryl, this is your last podcast. We're going to miss your expertise. You are retiring after how many years with OSBA?
17 and a half.
17 and a half.
In my 18th year, yeah.
Well, we wish you well in retirement in your next chapter, and we are going to miss your expertise on the podcast.
Well, thank you. Call me anytime.
Thanks, guys, for coming on, and thank you to our sponsor, Pappas & Associates. They're shaping policy with integrity.